Yes. Good morning, everyone. Another beautiful day the Lord has made. So very thankful. We are in Acts chapter number end of 27. We'll be in chapter 28 this morning. Glad you're here. Last week, actually we fitted the one Sunday they started in the storm, and the next Sunday they got out of the storm 1 week, and actually it was a 2-week period. So I feel accomplished that the 2-week period there in actual time we completed in 1 week. So enjoying the study. I'm enjoying the study very much. Before we start our class, Brian, will you lead us in the prayers? We get started, please, sir.
Father in heaven, as we come together today to study your word, we're thankful for the opportunity that we have. We ask you will help us as we study Acts, that we might take these lessons here and learn them and get a deeper understanding of your word and your will for us. I ask you help Doyle to remember the things he's prepared today, and that we might listen and keep an open mind on the things that we hear. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. This last week, you recall, they were in the great storm there on the sea, and as they tossed about, and then they finally made it to the island and the shipwreck and all that. That's what we looked at last week. So we really didn't get to the takeaway. So don't get a takeaway. I'd like to get started with the takeaway. I say takeaway, things we can learn, what we can see how God is magnified through this passage. So if you're thinking back on last week, you think of something that stands out to you, that's right now is where I'd like to get you to express your thoughts. But one thing that stood out to me, here they were on this ship, the storm was tossing around, and it had been awful. Paul was the great encourager, and he really, those who, remember, the hourglass was ticking down, they could see they were going to die. There was no hope for them. But God, through Paul, encouraged those people who are there. And our responsibility, too, as we look at that takeaway, in the storms of life, God put us where we are so we can encourage the faint-hearted. And those basically who seem to be in a position of hopelessness, and actually many of them are in a situation of hopelessness. If they're without God, without being right with God, they are hopeless. We can be like Paul, and we can encourage the faint-hearted. So anybody have something that you thought of that you say, well, that's something that I was encouraged from last week? Anyone? Cindy has a comment. And I know you're thinking, because everyone's out there, and, they're going,
I was just thinking what it would have been like to go through the storm when God had already told you were going to go to Rome. You know, so you already know you're coming through this. It would be a completely different experience, and that we should look at try to look at our problems like that too, because we're coming out on the other end too, just better.
Yeah, and Paul is just going through it. Apparently, he was looking at the hourglass too, because an angel came to encourage him. Said, "You're going to make it. You're going to go to Rome." And so, even when we do go to that storm, we can be like Paul, saying, "I just don't see how," but we can know with confidence the other side, and that is so true. We got to look to the other side. We have to look to as the sun came up. You remember they wished and prayed for the sun to come up, and prayed for that sun to come up. And God will keep his promises. So other thoughts about what we looked at this last week? I have several. Another one I thought we'd look at and be thinking, so we need to, in life, in that storm, stop and examine where we are. Where are we in this storm? Of course, we looked at earlier how they put out the sea anchors as they wrapped the ropes around the boat to hold it all together. They did but as you go on through the storm and you sense, what's going to happen here, we have to examine where we are. You remember they let down the leaded weight, take samples from the bottom, see how deep it was, and they examine, well, we've got to do this. So always be examining and looking, what do we need to do in the situation we're in? One more thing to look at is salvation, we found, is conditional. And being conditional is that there will be stipulations in order to find that salvation. And Paul uses the word unless. You remember the sailors as they in the pretense of putting we're going to go out in front of the boat and set some anchors out in front of the boat. You know, they had the anchors holding them back, but now we're going to set some out in front of the boat. And Paul told them, unless these men, these sailors, stay in the boat, you can't be saved. Now, Cindy just mentioned he's been promised you're going to make it. You know, all the people in this boat's going to survive too. But there are conditions. There's conditions in this life, and unless this takes place, you can't be saved. Now, I did a quick search on the word unless, and these are just a few of them. You remember Thomas, he wasn't there when Jesus first appeared to him in the upper room, and then the week later he was there. Do you remember what he said about his belief that Jesus had risen from the dead? Here's the word, unless I see the nail prints and put my hand in the side. It's conditional. If I can believe, I've just got to see it. So sometimes there's conditions such as that. Is used as well as, you remember the Ethiopian eunuch as he's traveling? And talk about a major event as the gospel is being spread. And Philip came and says, do you understand what you're reading? Remember, he's coming up to him and the chariot's going along. And he says, here's the word again, how can I unless someone helps me, someone teaches me what's going on. So things are conditional. But you come down and start looking at, I'll skip that one. There's so many we could look at. Jesus says to them, assuredly I say to you, unless you become as little children, you'll be no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Conditional. That salvation is conditional. Jesus also tells them in Luke chapter 13, verses 3 and on down to verse number 5, unless you repent, you'll likewise perish. So it's conditional. You know, salvation and being saved is going to be conditional upon something. So, and we can also look at in John chapter 3, as Jesus tells Nicodemus, unless one is born of the water and the Spirit, he cannot see, nor can he enter the kingdom of heaven. So there's conditions. And now here the condition is what? If we're going to be saved, if this boat's going to be saved, those sailors can't go out there. God had promised that, oh yes, everyone will be saved in this boat, but it was conditional upon following the instructions. So that's something that we can keep in mind, that we can learn from it. And as we look, kind of reviewing from last week, in the Acts chapter number 27, we see that eventually the sun does come up. The storm may be looking bad. It may be what's going to happen next, but eventually the sun will come up and things are going to work out. And I have a couple more. You know, we could talk about having a prayer before meal, because Paul prayed as he distributed the food. We could look at some other things as well. But let's go to they get ashore. Last part of chapter 27, those who could swim, they swam to shore first. Those who couldn't, they grabbed onto a part of the boat or something that they could hold onto, a plank, and they came to shore as well. So they all came to shore. Acts chapter 28, verse number 1. Open your Bibles with me as we look at this together. So comes the point that they have escaped. They've come safely to the shore. And it's interesting, as they came safely to the shore, and I like New American Standard because it brings out the meaning, the heart of it, is it says they were brought safely through. It's an imperfect tense. It's not something that they have done for themselves. Oh yes, I did it myself. I was the one who swam over. I did this. No, God had brought them safely through. So as they've been brought safely through, they found out the island they were on was Malta. They knew about Malta. They knew about Malta and where it would have been and how it had been situated. Luke refers to them as natives. I think the New American Standard, maybe in the King James, referred to them as barbarians. Luke was a Greek, right? You know, he was a Gentile, but a Greek specifically, and he spoke Greek. Those who didn't speak Greek, they were referred to as barbarians. But they were basically islanders, people who didn't speak the Greek language. So here they are. There's languages going on that there's a communication. You ever been to a place, and I'm thinking of going down to Mexico, and I'm there, and there's people talking all this language that I have no idea what they're saying. I'm not sure what's happening here, but they apparently could see very clearly what had taken place. They may even spied the ship out there as it was being battered. Okay, what are the odds that they're going to make it? Oh, they're not going to make it. We know right there. Then you can see the people, they're looking. But they knew what had taken place as this boat had come in and the shipwreck that had taken place. And we see here on the island of Malta that's down there in the very bottom left-hand corner, is that they came upon him, this island. This island is going to be about 17 miles long. It's about 9 miles wide, about 85 miles of shoreline around here. We talked about last week the odds of them hitting this little island through all this storm. God providential navigation got them there. It's known as a rock island. It's for anywhere from just a few inches, maybe up to a foot of topsoil, and then you get down to rock. So it's not an island that is a very productive island within itself, but is an island that was a key island on ship transportation in the harbor they would come through. Of course, the better harbors, as you can naturally see, the kind of the end parts of it would be onto the north side of that island. In the history of it, it had been conquered by lots of nations. Whoever was in control and wanted to control the shipping, they had Malta. And up until 1962, can you imagine who had control of the island of Malta back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s? What empire controlled a big portion of the world? The British Empire. 62, it became a free country, and it has been that way since then. It's an independent part of the European Union right now. So as they came to the island, the people there, they knew what was taking place. They lit a fire for them. Help dry them out. And you can imagine this, as they've come onto shore, this would be the time of year, the storm taking place. They guesstimate probably about 50 degrees. You ever been soaked to the bone, you're wet as you can be, and it's 50 degrees outside? It's cold. Ever been there, Wade? Yeah. I don't think, why am I in this tree stand right now? It's going to be a very, very miserable position. But as they were there, verse number 3, Paul's not one to sit idly by. I think of myself, I'm kind of like that. There's a fire going. What am I going to do for that fire? I'm going to make sure it keeps going, right? Paul goes out and he begins gathering some firewood. And he gets a bundle of sticks and he brings it over and puts it on the fire. And as he puts it on the fire, it says because the fire warmed up the snake. Remember, it's 50 degrees. Snakes don't move around very much in the cold. It warms up enough to bite, to strike Paul. Now it's a viper. This is the what it looks like in Malta today. So it's quite the city. But a viper is the way God's designed a viper is it bites. And I thought about putting a real picture of a snake on here, but there's some people that might get up and leave if I did that. So, and I'm one of those. I really don't like. But a viper with its fangs, usually it bites, injects the venom, and comes off. What happened with this snake? It bit him and it hung on. Now, of course, a lot of say, well, could this really happen? Because I've seen snakes that weren't vipers, and they grab onto you and they'd hold onto you. I remember Benjamin had one on his hand, and I was going, and here's just a little boy. Oh, snake's biting. He said, oh, Daddy, that's not hurting me. He's not poisonous. And then, he shook it and it fell off, and then he caught it again before it got away. But a viper, though, will just strike and let go. But being warm, being the warmth of the fire, and it warms up, it's not completely warm. It's still, it's still in the state of being almost frozen, right? It holds on to him. He shakes it off and it lands in the fire. Now, what do we know about a snake bite? If it's a viper, it's poisonous. You can get really bad sick. The islanders, those who lived there, they would have known about this snake. And they would have known that specific snake we saw on his hand, and we saw as Paul shook it off down the fire, and of course it couldn't get out of the fire. It burned up. It was destroyed. They would have known that this snake was highly poisonous. Because what did they thought would take place? Least of all, he began swelling up. Very likely he would do what? Die. He would drop down dead. And the way it describes it, they were looking at him. The intense, they were looking at him with expectation. You ever see a disaster and you think, okay, let's see what's going to take place next. And everybody's eyes were riveted on it, and they were watching. You think, oh, something bad's going to happen, but it doesn't happen. You know, they start, is it going to die? You know, and as time elapsed, they start, there's got to be something about this. Can you imagine? It would become a show almost. Oh, this guy's bit by a snake. Come look at it. We all saw it. You know, and they're all standing around. And here Paul is warming himself up by the fire. You know, he's not swelling up. He's not dropped down dead. And, oh, what must it be? He must be, as it goes on to describe, no doubt. Oh, verse number 4, they say, no doubt this man is a murderer, whom though he has escaped from the sea, justice did not allow him to live. Pretty common even today, right? Someone's suffering bad or wrong. Well, wonder what he did wrong to suffer that. And of course, as we look at the scriptures, we know it's not because of what we do that we suffer. Well, it could be, but God's not going to punish us immediately for that. So as Paul shook it off, and it describes verse number 5, and he shook off the creature. That word there, creature, it's interesting. It's and Luke would have known and used this kind of word. It's a medical term for some kind of creature that would be a poisonous animal that would give their poison, put their poison out. So interesting, it adds that to it. Again, waiting for them to swell up, drop dead. They looked, they saw it, and it describes it's for a long time that they were watching that. No harm came to it, and they changed their mind. And they changed their mind and said, he must be a god. Okay. They knew he was what? He was a prisoner, because he said he must have done something bad. That's why. So does it make sense that he's a prisoner who's done something bad, and now that he is a deity, a god? A bit fickle, wouldn't you think? And so they're thinking he must be a god. Reminds me back in chapter 14. You recall chapter 14, Lystra and Derbe, as he'd healed the man, and those there in the Lycaonian language began shouting, "Oh, it's not a man, it's God." And of course, they didn't understand it until they were making that sacrifice, about to have a big barbecue to feed everybody, and then they stopped him. But what was the response after that? There in chapter 14, remember what they did to Paul? They stoned him and they left him for dead. So they didn't do this, because it was just out there to take place. But people can be so very fickle. We see it today. We've seen it throughout the ages. And even when Jesus came into Jerusalem, they were crying out, "Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest." A few days later, what were they crying out? "Crucify him, crucify him." So people can be very fickle in all that. So they can change and look from one thing to another. But we begin looking at, and this is a passage that some in the religious world will take and look at miraculous events taking place today, and they're even snake charmers, or people who play with poisonous snakes. So kind of crazy, right? But they'll say, God's promised us that we'll be bit by snakes and we'll be okay. Which, when they are bit by snakes, many of them are very sick, and some of them do die, but they try to very carefully not to be bit by them. But they take that also from Mark chapter 16, as Jesus promises those of his disciples as they will be going out and God will take care of them, saying that they will be bit by serpents and God will care for them. So it reminds me, I was a speaker one time, was talking about a debate, and how he was debating one of these miraculous healers that could, that they weren't afraid of snakes and do that. And so I think maybe it was the second night of the debate, he brought a box out there and had a big rattlesnake in it. And it was covered up, couldn't see it. And as the debate went on, he said, "Now, I have a snake in here. I'm going to turn it loose and let you take care of it for us, okay?" And he kind of shake the cage a little bit while the debate was going on. You ever heard a rattlesnake shake his rattlers? We talk about the chill go right down your spine, right? The guy is debating. We said, no, don't let that snake out. "Oh, but if you can charm it, you can take care of it. We'll let you catch it and put it back." "Oh, no. So you look at it. Yeah, well, bit by a snake, but no, I don't think I want to be bit by a snake. But is God taking care of him? Is God using Paul to establish that he's has his power and his message is from God itself? Okay, I'm going to turn the page. I'm tired of looking at a snake head. So, Verse number 7. We're in Acts chapter 28, verse number 7. So there on the island of Malta, there's a place, an area, an estate by a well-to-do man. It describes him as a leading citizen, a chief officer, chief man, leading man. It's a term, actually, that they found in the archaeological finds there in Malta, a description of different people who held this title. So you begin looking again. Luke, as he writes, he's writing, and as we find discovery, the evidence of the historical accuracy as he writes. So and this man's name was Publius. He received them and entertained us courteously, as it describes. Basically, he's extending hospitality just because these people need it. Now, as it refers to, as he did this and as Luke writes, us, we don't know if it's just Luke and Paul, maybe Luke, Paul, and his companions, maybe Luke, Paul, the companions, and the soldiers and the other prisoners, or if it's the 286 people. We don't know what this is referring to, but here he is, as a leading citizen, he is extending his hospitality to this group of people. And he does so, as it describes, for 3 days. So they're there in his home. This would be as things are drying out and things are situated, and but he is showing that the kindness that he should extend. It reminds me in Hebrews chapter number 13, as it describes showing hospitality. In showing hospitality, you have entertained. Remember what it says you could be entertaining? Angels. You're doing something good for God and His messengers and His people, or it could be even within the miraculous realm. But verse number 8. This is after he has expressed this hospitality. So it's not because Paul showed this healing, this miracle of healing, that he shows the hospitality, but it's after the fact. So it happened that Publius' father, he was sick. And it says, sick of a fever and a dysentery. Believed, as we look through this, and I'm convinced of it, is I've read some writings and what people thought about it, that he was suffering from a disease that was common in that island and lots of other places, of a fever caused from goat's milk. It would be a bacteria found in goat's milk. Now, today, if you're going to have a goat, raise a goat, and begin milking that goat, you know what the law requires you to do before you drink that milk? No, not boil it. You have to have the goat checked. You have to have a blood test and make sure that goat's not carrying this bacteria that then could pass on to people. But it's believed that maybe this is the case, and we'll explain that and bring it all together as we go through this study. But Paul went in. He went to go visit him, and as he was visiting with him, it says that he prayed for him. Now, the question, well, why did Paul pray before he healed him? All kinds of questions come out. Is it because he's asking God for help to heal him? Doesn't commonly do that. Is he praying to see if he should heal him or not? No, I don't think that's the case. I believe Paul, as he leads his prayer is to show all those around where this healing is coming from. Before, they didn't know. They thought, oh, it's Paul who's performing this great miracle. But he said, it's God working through him. So he prays, then he lays his hands on him, and he healed him. And the word healed him is the word iomia. And this is the Greek word for supernatural healing. As he placed his hands on him, gave him this supernatural healing as he was healed. So, verse number 9. When this was done, of course, the word gets out, what? Everybody else becomes to the island who had the diseases and were sick, had different sicknesses. They came and they were healed. But notice here, as we look at this, the word healed here is the word therapeo. Therapeo. What? This is the word healed here. What word would we think in the English for therapeo? Therapy, right? It's a different word. Now, there could have been some miraculous healings here, because it could be used for that, but also could be used for taking care of the things that makes them sick. Luke is a what? A doctor. Began looking, what's this man doing? He'd been drinking a lot of goat's milk. These other people, they're sick and everything. I wonder why they're sick. Or maybe you've been drinking a lot of goat's milk. And they begin identifying is that there's a bacteria that's being spread that's causing this sickness, and it's spread by this drinking goat's milk. So, and I say that because it goes on in verse number 10, is they also honored us in many ways. Not just Paul, but the plurality of Paul and all his companions. So, possibility, as Luke is the physician, he begins educating people about hygiene. And Doris, you're probably right there. You take the goat's milk, and if you boil it, there's bacteria. Pasteurize, that's the word we're looking for. If they pasteurize it, then you can drink it, and you don't have to worry about this. So here you have Luke as he's educating them, and they're saying, wow, this is great. We can drink goat's milk again and not have to worry about it. So perhaps this is a part of it, as they were honored them greatly. They had great respect for Paul, but also for all of the company there, as they had been there. And so the respect was given to all of them. It was to see Luke being involved as well as the other Christians there to help them out. So they honored us, and they honored especially when they're ready to leave, and they provided the things that they needed. Now, what did they have when they got off that boat and was standing along the shore? What was their earthly possessions there? They might have been able to carry a little bag. They might have had something tied around their neck or something, but all that ship was lost. It was gone. So they needed some basic necessities. And the people there in Malta, they were kind, and they gave those things that they needed, supplied their needs. And I think it's important to note that it wasn't a matter of a payment for what they were doing, although some may thought of, they did good to me, I need to give them this. But it seems to be, the most part, it's because of being thankful. We support Scouts, we help support Benjamin and other people who are doing God's work. It's a matter, we do it because that's what we need to do, because the goodness that they're about doing, the work they're doing, we need to support them in their work. So, but it basically is voluntary gifts. It wasn't something that they charged them. They didn't charge them for, okay, I'm healing you, you got to give me this, or I'm teaching you how to pasteurize milk, you've got to pay me this to do that. It was because of their thankfulness for them. Josephus writes about, during this time of world and nautical travel, traveling on the ocean, that here at where Malta is, it's about a 3-month period that from the time that they were here until they would need to travel on, or they could travel on because of the weather. Remember the treacherous weather there as they would be going. So it'd be putting it to the middle of February before that they could travel in this part of the area. You go back further onto Crete, it's going to be more in March, because you're getting more oceans and everything. But so it'd be February. Verse number 11, we find what? How long were they there on the island of Malta? 3 months, just like we find historical records that was taking place there. And notice they found an Alexandrian ship. It had to have been a beautiful ship. It had the figurehead of the twin brothers. History tells us these were Greek gods. Anybody remember studying about the Greek gods in high school? Yeah, I remember studying that. I don't know about these gods, these idols. But it's really interesting because there's a lot of history about them. These two specific Greek gods were referred to as Castor and Pollux. One was a horse trainer and one was a boxer. And it's almost like the cartoon characters. You read the cartoons and the superheroes do these things. Well, they were a couple of superheroes. And one time they rescued their sister from the wicked king. All these writings that you look through the Greek mythology as they wrote about. But these two figureheads specifically is described as they were the guardians for the sailors who sailed upon the waters. So this ship had these two figureheads coming up out of the front, the decorative, and I don't remember if I put that picture. No, I did not. Of the ship that would look like, but it would be quite the carving. So they saw that. The people there had recognized it as the guardians of those who had sailed upon the sea. It had been there at the island, so it had been there probably since November, and now they're getting ready to travel again. Oh, by the way, these two gods, they made it to the stars, right? You have the stars and the gods of the stars. You ever heard the stars referred to Gemini? That would be a reference to these two gods that they have. But now I mentioned all that. Why? Paul or Luke, as he writes about this through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, it just confirms the history of the things that were going on right then as we find in the Bible. The evidence of the Bible being true, the evidence being correct is overwhelming, especially as we've looked throughout a lot of things here in Luke chapter, especially 26, 27, and 28, as we're seeing all these taking place. So, as they're traveling along, I have to remember which way is up on this thing. Let's go back to our map. They go from Syracuse up to Rhegium is where they'll travel next. So in landing at Syracuse, so they're in the south, they're in Malta, they go up to Syracuse. And what is that island there off the toe of Italy referred to? Sicily, right? So it's a quite a great country, a very prosperous country. It was famous for shipbuilding, for fishing, bronze work. So it was a rather wealthy island and important island for all this. It's interesting also here in Syracuse that, have you heard of the catacombs? The catacombs are places where Christians were buried, basically hiding them underground. A lot of them in Rome, but there's some that's been found here in Syracuse too, looking at the historical evidence here. And they stayed there for just a little while, 3 days. And after 3 days, we see that, in here, verse number 13, it says, New King James says, they circled around. And you'll look at these different translations, they're going to have different things. Let's see, one says weighed anchor, in other words, made a circuit, another one sailed around. It's a nautical term for cast loose. One translation probably not correct, at least in our imagery. It may not have been when the King James wrote it, but it said they fetched a compass. They weren't using a compass with a needle to finding, that's not what was taking place here. But being that nautical term is, they were about to travel through some very dangerous water from Syracuse up to Rhegium. And as they were be going through that, they're going to find is that they, then in the next verse saying, after one day, the south wind blew, and they were able to go up to Puteoli. So you see from Rhegium on up to Puteoli. Now it's interesting, we're talking about a place that we can find historically evidence of. It was a very treacherous place, and the sailors wanted to have ideal weather to travel through it. This again goes back to mythology and all that, but Carbulus and Scylla, something like that. And they even had the term, you've heard between a rock and a hard place. It's a really difficult place to go through. These two places, Carbulus and Sicilia, it was a place where described as there's two gods there, two wicked, evil gods. And one is the god that hides under these big rocks, and they'll come out and they'll grab the ship and pull it in. The other one is just a big rock that's going to come and smash the ships. And you look at it now, and come down to this picture here, right here. This is the area where it is. And it's described as an area, it said about a bow shot distance. How far can you shoot an arrow? Now today you can shoot a lot further than maybe what they could then, right? It said a bow shot across that they had to navigate through this area. This area had these terrible rocks on one side that the ships would, sometimes a current would pull them towards those rocks. The other side, very interesting, there was whirlpools. And some of the whirlpools, they were described big enough to actually draw a ship in and pull the ship under. So you're looking at these two places, and so what do? They waited 3 days. Okay, we want to be sure that we can navigate through this area. A nice wind is blowing. We can make it now, and so they headed out. So it's interesting we look at the actual geography that's there, what the people taught and believed at that time. So they came through, and they are going to come to Puteoli. And Puteoli, no, I'm not quite ready for that one. It's going to be, I meant to put another map in here. I have to come back here. It is going to be about 142 miles, that's what it is, 142 miles from Rome. So they're getting closer. No, Rhegium is 142 miles. Puteoli is going to be Syracuse. I have to stop and think about all these numbers. But so we're getting closer to Rome is what we're looking at. And there in Puteoli, okay, it is 142 miles from Rome. And there in Puteoli as well, there's a lot of historical, from monuments to architecture and structures and things like that. But there they found some Christian brethren. And they invited them to stay, and they stayed for 7 days. It's interesting, 7 days or 8 days is a common time that they would spend at a place. You would look, they wanted to get a Lord's Day in there. They wanted to be able to be at the brethren on a Sunday so they could worship with them, I believe. And you think about, is Paul controlling this trip? Now, who's in charge? And we can say God is ultimately in control, but who says, okay, we're going to go to travel this little ways up here, or we're going to travel, we're going to get this boat here? Who's the one calling these things? It would be the centurion. It'd be Julius. And I mentioned, I think last week, I'm thinking Julius is probably pretty close if he hasn't already become a Christian. You know, as he would have been there when Paul was speaking before King Agrippa and Bernice and Festus and all those. It said those commanders were there. So he'd been hearing and listening to Paul and finding about Christianity for quite some time now. And I see that he's quite wanting to help and do things that will benefit the Lord's church in that way. So they were there for 7 days, then they headed on to Rome. Now, from the 7 days that they were there, word would have gotten there, they're staying with the brethren, and somebody would have run up to Rome and say, Paul is on his way. Remember, he had written a letter to them back, been a few years before, maybe 4 years, I'm thinking, that he's wanting to come. And now the message comes to the church, Paul is on his way. So as the message came there, we find that in verse number 15, they heard about them. They came to meet them, came as far as Appian Forum, and 3 inns. Now, the Appius Forum is about 40 miles from Rome. This is where I'd meant to put a closer up on this, but we're right up in here. Appius Forum is about 10 miles difference. Now, it appears as if the word went to Rome, a group came and met them as far as the Appian Forum. As they continued on, another group came, so another wave came and met him there in the 3 inns, the taverns. Why the 2 different groups? We don't know. But when both groups came together, we see that Paul thanked God and he took courage. I'm kind of thinking, as one commentator thought, is that perhaps some Jewish Christians came first, and the Gentiles then came later and met them, or maybe vice versa, we don't know. But when they all came together, Paul's saying, we're in this together. There's a unity here. Because you remember the divisiveness and the struggle there's been with the Jewish people receiving Christians in. And so Paul, as he gives thanks for them coming there. Interesting, and of course we're looking at historical as they talk about these places where we're looking at here as they're traveling. The Tavern of 3 Inns, this would be someone who was writing about this during the time. Intolerable drinking water, gnats, frogs, and begging innkeepers. It is not the most pleasant place. You try to stay somewhere, and the innkeeper, well, you want me to get a bed for you? Well, that costs you a little bit more. So in looking at that, I'm sure that Paul, his group, was glad that they had who with them? Well, we say God was with them, but also had Julius, who was a centurion, saying, you're not going to put us in there. You're going to treat us right. So. But as it came and realized all this had taken place, Paul thanked God. He took courage. But now he knew that God was going to get him there. But still that human part of it saying, am I really going to make it? Am I really going to make it? And now I'm almost there. He's taking courage as all this is about to come about and take place. Because we know that as he prayed for that he could go to Rome, God promised him that he would, Acts chapter 23. And now we find the arrival in verse number 16. So he entered Rome. And he began thinking as he's coming to Rome, what would he have seen? Anybody heard of the Circus Maximus? It was one big, some refer to it as an arena. It's more a fairground. And basically, it's all this. It was a fairground, an area that they said would accommodated close to 250,000 people. Let's think. That is 250,000 people in this one area. Commonly within historians' writing about this, all the things going on, that they would have well over 150,000 people coming to this place. Now, for me to wrap my minds around this, that's a lot of people as they would come to this area. As Paul would have been coming into Rome, he would have walked the roads right by the Circus Maximus. He would have been there to see these great structures. Now, this is a model of it. The one is a racetrack, and I know some of you really like race car racing. They had chariot racing in here, and the spectators would come to the chariot races. You also have to the far side, to the far right, it's kind of a Colosseum-looking thing, and this is where they would have all kinds of sporting events, activities, and this is where later, after Nero began the persecution of the church, this would be closer to, getting closer to 70 AD, it would have been where Christians would have been martyred there. Whenever I was in college, we did a tour there in Italy, and I remember going and seeing this structure. Part of it's still there, some is fallen in and things like that. But you look down into it, it looks like a maze. But what it was is they had a maze underneath it with different tunnels and different little holding cages, holding apartments, and they had a floor on top of that, and the people come up on top. So they would bring things from underneath up to the top for the thing. Well, what they would do is they would bring the Christians out, and they would have lions or other wild beasts, and they would bring them out to attack them. That would be a part of the history of the persecution of the church. Now, this is going to be years later. Nero is the Caesar right now, but Nero at this time, he hasn't quite lost all his brains at this moment. So he's not persecuting Christians at this time. So it's going to be more of a pleasant time than coming in. But as Paul would see all these things as he entered Rome, what blew my mind, half of the days in the year were designated holidays. Can you imagine that? Every other day, what are we going to celebrate today? This is in Rome, that is. It was incredibly wealthy, but then again, incredibly poor. You talk about the city of Rome, about 13 miles circumference, so it wasn't as big as Malta, the island of Malta, but it's pretty good size. You'd have those places that would be the Roman villas, beautiful structures, marble floor, all tapestry, everything just so gorgeous and beautiful. And a lot of the Romans lived there, the ones who were in power, the ones who had money, the ones who but now what do you have in any kind of dictatorship really? You have the ones who have it, and you have the ones who don't. Describing the area, and this is what would take place in about 68 AD, when, no, it's 66, 67, somewhere right in there, that, remember Nero burned Rome, played his fiddle while Rome burned, you remember that being described in history. This is the part of town that would have been struck a match on and fire, and that would be the poor part of town. There'd be apartments as many as 6 stories high, just little cubicle rabbit hutches, maybe 3 or 4 foot between them that you would walk. You couldn't call it a street or hardly barely a sidewalk. That would be just a maze of all these apartments, a massive amount of people. Now, you'd have this as the poor, and you'd have the rich, and there might have been a few in between, but not just a whole lot. It was of two extremes. And as Paul was coming into Rome and examining all these things, he would have seen the need for Christianity. He would see how important it would be for Christianity. Now, you have those who had and those who had not. The ones who had, what did the have-nots, what were they? Starts with the sl and ends with the ave. They were slaves. They were owned by the rich people. They were thrown the crumbs that they would survive on. So it was been a most interesting place as Paul would have entered it. And you notice then that last part of the verse, Paul being allowed to have his own rented place. Now, it's not going to be one of those fancy villas. It may not have been the little tiny rabbit hutch either, but it's not going to be a very fancy place that he would have been staying by. And there's a soldier who would stay there and guard him. Extremely wealthy city, fabulous architecture, entertainment, food, luxury, arts, and just amazing place. Let's see. Do I get one more slide? Maybe if I turn this around. No. Yeah, one more slide. This is some of what's left of the Circus Maximus. It reminds me, well, we'll talk about this as we close out this next week, but rust being a witness. Where is it all today? All that great, magnificent thing, rust as a witness. We'll pick up there, be thinking of takeaways we look at as we're coming into the last part of it. I'm hoping this next week, as we finish up the book of Acts, we'll be able to get in and touch him and looking at in detail, well, as much detail as I can go in my little time I have, of the providence of God, God providentially working in our lives, and the miraculous. So, fantastic stuff. Thank you so much.